Hello and welcome to the Superposition Guys podcast. My name is Yuval, and my guest today is Heather West, a research manager at IDC, focusing on quantum computing. Heather and I talk about where quantum computing is prioritized relative to other enterprise IT opportunities, the potential integration of quantum into the HPC data center, full stack versus best-of-breed vendor selection, and much more. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, Heather, and thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity.
So, who are you and what do you do?
So, I am a research manager at IDC, and I work on our infrastructure systems, platforms, and technologies group. And my primary focus of research is quantum computing. And I lead our quantum computing research at IDC, but I'm very fortunate to work alongside of our group vice president and general manager Shishnath Karni and research vice president Peter Rudin. And between the three of us, we have launched the quantum computing research at IDC in 2018, and since then we've been on this wonderful ride of learning about quantum and meeting and working with people within the quantum ecosystem. So
Guests that come on this podcast are typically from the quantum industry, so they think that quantum is the most important thing in the world. But you speak with enterprises that have other issues as well. Where does quantum rank in their priorities?
yes, I also contribute to research that has to do with workload infrastructure, storage and systems, storage and server systems that support the various workloads, and I assist Peter on some AI research as well. And so we get to talk to a variety of different end users, and then even within our own quantum research, we speak to a variety of end users. And had we spoken back in 2018 when we began researching quantum, there were very few enterprises and companies that were even thinking about what quantum computing is. It was still more of an academic technology. But then over the course of the last 4 years, what we began to see is IT developers first beginning to take an interest in quantum computing because they saw it as a way to solve these problems that they just couldn't solve using their current classical compute technology. And that's kind of where a lot of these quantum initiatives within enterprises, the early adopters of enterprises, really started, because then they started to experiment or research the technology and figure out how could they start to begin experimenting with it to use it in their own IT department, and then begin making the business case that filtered up to the executive level. More recently, what we begin to see is another sort of transition where executive level stakeholders within enterprises or within the companies are starting to understand the value that quantum computing will bring in the long term. And as a result, now we're starting to see interest with those executive level. And now the focus of saying, okay, this is something long term, but this is really it's a technology that we should start thinking about and experimenting with today so that we can gain the value once that fault tolerant computer is realized later.
What does the typical experimentation look like? Is that a 2 or 3 person team and a little bit of cloud time, or is that a more systematic effort to identify use cases, to contract with vendors, and so on?
So that really is very dependent on the company. So some companies, they understand that this is a long-term endeavor, and they understand that being able to experiment with quantum and to do it right and to really identify those use cases and start building those algorithms and those applications is a process that should be really well mapped out so that they get to where they want to be by the time we hit that fault tolerant machine. And as a result, we see those sorts of companies investing more. And when I say more, we're not talking 50 to 75% of their IT spend. We're talking small proportions, like we're talking less than 10%. But they're investing more They are establishing a quantum computing champion within the organization itself, who or developing a quantum research group, who then be, starts to educate both themselves as well as others within the organization, whether it be the IT department who will need the skills and the other resources, and how does this change and how can this be beneficial to them, or whether it's the executive level who might need a better understanding as to the business value and what the expectations are. Some executives are still really focused on that short term ROI versus the long term. So, in that respect, it's a very well-defined process as to how quantum is being adopted and well, I didn't say implemented, but experimented with. And then we have other companies that kind of similar to what I had mentioned in the beginning, where the IT developers really understand that this technology is going to be industry disruptor, that this technology will assist them in solving those intractable problems that just are out of scope for classical compute at this particular point in time. And they as individuals, maybe there's one or two individuals within that IT department are taking it upon themselves to either self-educate or experiment, or really taking it upon themselves and then trying to convince others within the company that this is something that really should be a focus, or an initiative that started within the company. So there's really that continuum of companies, of those who are really well structured and those are just a couple individuals within the IT department trying to drive the process.
You spoke about a quantum champion, and I'm curious if you see a pattern. Where does this quantum champion sit? Is that in the IT department? Is that in the business unit? After all, quantum could potentially impact many areas. Or maybe it's in the security department where they worry about quantum security. Where would that champion sit?
Well, the best example that I've heard when talking to various end users is a group, or a quantum research group, that's a group of champions, essentially, that represent all these different departments that you've spoke about: the business area, the executive level, the security. Because once stakeholders within the organization start to realize what quantum is, and maybe they don't understand it in the technical terms, digging down into like what a qubit is, and talking about pulse control and all that, but once they start to realize what the potential advantages could be, then everyone has a problem they want to try to run on quantum. And as we all know, quantum computing is complex. There's definitely a learning curve that goes with it. And so by including members of these various stakeholder groups, it helps to really understand where some of the largest problems exist, um, which problems would be best suited for quantum to either demonstrate a business value, in the more near term, if possible, or which use cases are more in line with the mission in the development or the future of the company. So that's kind of how I've seen the best use of it, is really creating that group, that quantum research group, to lead as a champion unit. Because as you said, when you have one person who's trying to represent for the whole company, that can become problematic in trying to understand all these other areas in the priorities of these other areas of the company.
I'm sure there are many companies that rely on IDC as a trusted advisor. And I'm wondering, what questions are you fielding from customers that they want answers from IDC? And I'm guessing some of these answers come in the form of general, widely available reports. What reports are coming from IDC about quantum?
So we're in the process of putting together what we call an IDC marketscape. And in our IDC marketscape, what it does is it scopes out the various hardware. We're looking at quantum hardware vendors with ours, but it looks at the quantum hardware vendors within the quantum market to basically determine what their role is in this particular market segment. So not necessarily indicating vendor A is number one, vendor B is number two, vendor three is number, so forth, and ranking them per se, but how do they rank with regards to where they are? Is there a vendor that's a particular leader within the market? Are there some up and coming vendors that maybe haven't um, advanced to the point where they're developing a full stack, but maybe the technology that they're developing and introducing into the market is innovative? And this is someone that should be, this is a hardware vendor that should be kind of kept an eye on as they start to progress and start to make more announcements as they continue through. So that's one that's coming. We're in the process of developing that at this particular point in time. And then we will be releasing our second quantum computing forecast, I believe, at the end of Q1, which will kind of give an update as to the forecast that we provided in November of 2021 regarding the market growth and where we expect it to be growing within the next 5 or so years. So those are a few of the reports that we expect to see, a few of the big ones that we expect to see coming out.
Do you see companies engage directly with quantum hardware vendors, or do they prefer to go through a cloud provider like Amazon Bracket or Azure, and then be able to work with multiple providers?
Both. So for some of the companies that we speak with, some of them are still a little bit weary, or I shouldn't say weary, but they're still, well, they're all in the experimental process, but some of them are unsure as to which type of technology they feel would be best suited for the problems that they're going to solve, or that would be best suited for their industry. Like I said earlier, the fault tolerant quantum machine is years out from being realized. In that time period, what we could see is new technology come about that we haven't seen yet. And that could bring with it new advantages. It could be better suited for solving particular types of problems for particular industries. We just don't know. So, by investing or subscribing to a particular or working with a particular quantum hardware vendor, some companies get concerned that they will get into this vendor lock-in, or this, for maybe a generation lock-in, because they're only working with one vendor and the hardware that's being developed by that particular vendor. For those organizations, we hear they're more likely, or they prefer to work with some of these cloud service providers because it gives them exposure to multiple types of quantum hardware that's being developed. It gives them access to the different types of qubit type technology that's being developed. So, for instance, you might work with one particular cloud service provider that offers access to a superconducting, as well as maybe a neutral atom, as well as maybe a photonic. And those technologies work really different. But in addition to those technologies, what they also gain access to are all the tools and resources that they need to develop applications, perhaps some consulting services to help them identify and walk them through the process of learning quantum or being quantum aware. Um, and they also get access to some hardware agnostic software that allows them to transition very easily between one type of quantum hardware type and another quantum hardware type. And as a result, they don't have to risk investing in developing an algorithm or an application that works with one particular system but won't with another, or a particular generation and then another. So
Have you seen companies that are disappointed in quantum, that basically say it's too early, it's 30 years away? I mean, they used to say that about nuclear fusion, and look what happened, right? But do you see companies that are disappointed in quantum, or not yet?
I wouldn't say disappointed. I would say hesitant. I think it's too early to say disappointed because, again, the technology is so early on that it's really just this exploratory stage of figuring out what is quantum. That's a big question: is what is quantum? Why should I be investing in it? What use cases or problems are most applicable to it? So a lot of the companies that we speak to are still in those early, very early phases of it. So I think disappointment isn't necessarily the right word. I definitely think thinking it as more of a risk, and why should they be looking into it is more of a sound thought that we hear, because again, it's still really early on. the technology is still very unstable. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with it. There's, lack of consensus as to which technology will be the winner, if there is a winner, when quantum advantage will be realized, so on and so forth. So I think in that respect, that's more what we're hearing.
Do you see a big push to integrate quantum into the high performance computing center? And do you see that primarily as a cloud based integration or on premise?
So now we're hearing more and more about the potential to integrate it into the HPC centers, and that I would say that conversation really started. Maybe we started to hear more about it really about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, but not quite. Before that, it was just, oh, what is quantum good for? What are these use cases? But we have started to hear more and more about that, and there are a couple different approaches that we're starting to hear. We are hearing from some of those. Organizations that are really concerned with security and concerned with performance, and as a result would like to have an on-premise system. But obviously, as you and I both know, these technologies, these systems are really early on. They're very complex to maintain and run, and so that um, provides some challenges in itself. And a lot of the hardware vendors themselves, because it is still early on, they would prefer to give access in the cloud until they are able to resolve some of the issues around the hardware itself. But there are some vendors out there who do have some on-prem options. Um, but we are hearing from end users that they do prefer using the cloud for many of the same reasons I just spoke about. But in addition to the fact that some of these cloud service providers are making it really easy to integrate the their classical compute infrastructure that's in the cloud with the quantum service that's in the cloud. And as a result, because they're used to that interface, because it easily integrates, because they don't have to worry about some of the security measures around that, that's already being taken care of by the cloud service provider, that tends to be their preference. So we see kind of both. I know
Do you
that
see
doesn't help you with your answer.
That's perfect. Do you see opportunities for cloud service providers, even new data center providers, to actually use quantum as a magnet to say we've got this a great quantum computer in our data center, so now you should move some of your classical compute to us for ease of integration?
I have heard some cloud service providers putting that out there as a kind of a marketing technique. I will say that's kind of a new message that I'm starting to hear. I think connecting the dots is again something that's a fairly new conversation to be had. But I mean, it definitely brings up food for thought, right? If you're going to be using a cloud system that's in the cloud, it makes sense to transfer some of that data into the cloud as well, start working with some of those other classical systems that are in the cloud because of all those issues that we just spoke about.
You've been covering quantum for a number of years. What do you know today that you didn't know 6 months ago? What's new?
So I try to I try to keep up with quantum as much as possible, but every day, every week, there's a new announcement coming out from a new hardware vendor, from a new software vendor. It's just an amazing time right now in quantum with all the advancements. So every day I'm learning something new. But I think one of the what we saw this past year in 2022 was a bigger emphasis on post quantum cryptography. And I think the reason why we're hearing more about post quantum cryptography is because we're at this inflection point between quantum being an academic technology and then it's moving into this commercialization, not ready for commercialization, but more and more executive level individuals as well as enterprises themselves are really starting to take notice. And so now they're starting to understand what quantum is and that it can solve these really difficult problems, and then starting to make the connection that one of these most difficult problems they can solve has to do with security and how we encrypt our data at this particular point in time. So as a result of that transition, we have started to see more and more of an emphasis and a concern about the post quantum cryptography and what enterprises should do at this point in time to start protecting their data now, so that it won't get stolen and then later decrypted later. So that's one thing. Another emphasis that I'm starting to see is the emphasis on networking, quantum networking, and communication. Obviously, there's been research that's been done on that. This is not new to quantum, but with the conversations surrounding scaling and using modular architecture to scale these machines in the future comes the conversation of, well, how do you connect the machines? What does that connectivity look like? And that conversation is now starting to surround more the quantum networking, quantum communication. So that's a new area which I'm excited to learn more about as we start hearing more and more about how these architectures will start to be developed and introduced.
As we get close to the end of our conversation today, I'm wondering what IDC advises customers with regards to full stack versus best of breed vendors. Is it best to go to a single vendor that has hardware and software and consulting and what have you? Or should an enterprise contract multiple vendors to and try to get them to integrate with each other?
Gosh, that's a difficult question. So, if there is a particular vendor that a company's been working with, and that's where they get most of their classical compute, and they feel most comfortable working with that vendor, then perhaps that is the right option for them. They feel comfortable, they've developed this relationship as a trusted partner. Perhaps the quantum specialists that are working for that particular vendor have also the subject knowledge that is needed to help develop these programs in combination with the technology. So maybe that is a better fit for those companies that are still unsure about quantum and unsure about the type of technology, the types of problems, just starting out. Um, it may be best for them to use a cloud service provider that gives them these options of experimentation to see what's out there, what they can play with, what works better now, or running these small instances on these machines. So I think it really just depends on the comfort level. But if a company is unsure, IDC is definitely recommending, taking a look at these cloud service providers and some of these quantum computing platform as a service offerings that are out there.
I want to ask you a hypothetical question. If you could have dinner with any of the quantum greats, dead or alive, who would that
Oh, goodness.
person be?
Oh, goodness. That's just, there's such concern about security. I think Peter Shore would be a great person to have dinner with, just to ask him, what do you think? And you have this algorithm out there, and now there's all this concern surrounding it. Like, what are your thoughts? Like, if would you do it over again? How would you guide people? That'd be an interesting conversation, I think.
Perfect. How can people get in touch with you to learn more about your work?
Sure. So I am on LinkedIn. If you want to reach me through LinkedIn, Heather West. I'm also on Twitter, and they can contact me through my email at IDC. It's hwest at idc.com.
Excellent. Heather, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much. This is a great opportunity. We'll have to do this again soon.